There's a question that comes to mind when I think about Shenmue 3. It's a simple question, one that, like Shenmue 3 itself, gets straight to the heart of the matter. What do you want from a game? Since Shenmue 3's release a few months ago, reviews and internet commentary have been split between lukewarm to downright disrespectful and rude.
I played that there Shenmue 3 this week for a bit. Is that serious? Like, it's not a joke, is it?
I hope that's the last we'll see of Jim Sterling in this video, but I can't promise anything. Even a small but vocal crowd of Shenmue fans have expressed feeling shortchanged by a game that they helped fund all those years ago. A game that they've all waited 20 years for, only to find that the story is still only getting warmed up by the time the credits roll. That isn't how I feel. Shenmue 3 is my favourite game of 2019, and quite possibly one of my favourite games that I've ever played, and I'd like to explain why, but I can't without also trying to answer that question. What do you want from a game? This is Yu Suzuki. Although video games are made by huge teams of people, it isn't an exaggeration to say that Yu Suzuki is the man responsible for pushing the medium forward in the 80s and 90s with legendary arcade titles like Outrun, Hang On, Afterburner and many more. Whether using super scaler technology or with full polygonal graphics and virtua racing, Suzuki's main talent was in designing games that drew you into the screen like nothing else. Not just with the insane speed and forward momentum of the games on display, but with the feeling of how they played. These games exist in a hyper-realist dimension where physics are pushed to just enough of a limit to make you, the player, really feel the rush of driving a Ferrari with the top down or doing a barrel roll in a jet fighter. But it was Virtua Fighter that really set Suzuki and his team at AM2 apart from the rest. Here was a game and a blueprint that had realistic movement and a real sense of being in control of a human being doing real martial arts. The blueprint was refined and revised through the years, and the Virtua Fighter series became a legend in the arcades of Japan. Compare Virtua Fighter to other fighting games of the time, and it's clear to see why it's so special. Although Street Fighter and its various clones were no slouches, they've always been more of a cartoon brought to life compared to Virtua Fighter's more realist aspirations. Tekken and Dead or Alive? Well, although they both share DNA with Virtua Fighter, neither really quite reaches the mark. Tekken's slightly stilted multi-limb controls and Dead or Alive's snappy anime-like battles don't quite have the same grace and purity of Virtua Fighter's perfect, balanced gameplay. The point here isn't that other fighting games aren't good. The point is that Virtua Fighter is the best, and the reason for that is Yu Suzuki. His absolute commitment to pursuing his goal resulted in a series of fighting games that really captured the essence of martial arts in a video game. What do you want from a game? Balance, purity, intense competition, depth. These are what Virtua Fighter gives, but Yu Suzuki wanted more. Because there's no real substitute for proper research, Suzuki travelled to China in the 90s to research real martial arts styles for Virtua Fighter. Nowadays, a game developer can hire a martial artist in a motion capture studio for a few hours and will have enough animation data to fill a game. But Suzuki actually got in the ring with a Shaolin monk and was rewarded with a broken rib for his efforts. Valuable research that paid dividends. Suzuki experienced firsthand the variety and rich history of many kung fu styles on his trip, most notably the explosive and brutal Baji Quan used by Akira. He even visited the grave of Li Shuen, one of Baji Quan's most famous, maybe even infamous practitioners. I'd like to think this journey sparked a realisation in Suzuki. A realisation that Virtua Fighter in its current state could only ever capture the exhibition and spectacle of martial arts. Because kung fu is about more than hitting people in a match. Kung fu is about knowledge, growth and discipline. Kung fu is about the life lived in pursuit of these things. Suzuki's eyes were opened, and while the Virtua Fighter series would continue to go from strength to strength, the seeds were sown for something much bigger and more ambitious than had ever been done before in a video game. And so gaming's greatest, grandest story, a story that's still incomplete, began. I won't bore you with what you already know. Everybody knows that Suzuki's Virtua Fighter RPG project eventually became Shenmue. What's important to know is that the scope of the project remains unprecedented. Suzuki penned a martial arts epic that unfolds in real time, a slow-burning tale of revenge that sought to simulate every aspect of one teenager's life in Japan, Hong Kong and mainland China. If Kung Fu is all about how one lives their life in all aspects, then Suzuki would make the player feel it. Not just in every punch thrown training in a dojo, but in every door knocked, every shop visited, every conversation had, and every single intricately rendered packet of crisps bought from the shops. All the Shenmue games feature the big action sequences, huge fights and cinematic moments expected of big budget video games. But they also feature long stretches of just being this weird, awkward guy. Playing as Ryo Hazuki means being a fighting game character when they're not fighting. When Ryo gets into a fight, you know what he's capable of because you've been with him every step of the way, whether he's been training diligently or spending all his time playing games down the arcade. It's that question again. What do you want from a game? Do you want to get straight to the cool stuff, or do you want to live and feel every moment of your character's life? Suzuki clearly wanted to give us the latter, but the market didn't agree. Critically, Shenmue 1 and 2 had their fans, but they didn't sell well enough to fulfill Suzuki's ambition. Despite two epic games spanning multiple chapters and cities, Ryo's journey was far from over by the end of Shenmue 2. And so began nearly 2 decades of waiting for the next chapter in the Shenmue saga. Outside of a loyal following of fans, Shenmue became kind of an industry joke. That game with the dodgy voice acting where you look for sailors and drive forklifts. Games moved on, delivering massive open-world playgrounds and thrill-a-minute blockbuster roller coasters, leaving Shenmue looking slow, stilted and antiquated by comparison. When Shenmue III's Kickstarter was launched, there were more than a few outlets asking who it was for in today's market. Clearly, with one of the most successful video game Kickstarter campaigns ever, quite a lot of folk. Still, would Shenmue 3 learn any lessons from today's video game landscape? Would it take inspiration from Uncharted's streamlined hand-holding or Grand Theft Auto's urban sprawl? Would it have less deliberate and idiosyncratic controls? No. Thank fuck for that. The wait for Shenmue 3 has been agonising. I don't mean the wait since Shenmue 2, by the way. That was sad and depressing more than anything. I mean the wait from that fateful day at E3 2015 when Yu Suzuki came round everybody's house, cap in hand, until November 19th, 2019 when the game was finally in my grasp. A gruelling 4.5 years of hanging on for every little bit of information about what form Shenmue 3 would actually take. How big would it be? How much of the story would it tell? How would combat be handled? Would it even feel like a Shenmue game? The good news is that in the time since Shenmue 2 has released, Yu Suzuki has played very few games, which means his vision hasn't been tainted by recent trends. Every update, whether it was a short development video blog or a work in progress trailer, confirmed that this was still the passion project Shenmue fans wanted it to be. While Assassin's Creed set the trend for every video game protagonist to be a dab hand at effortlessly parkouring around the place at the press of a button, Ryo walks around like the same awkward human being he always has. While Uncharted gave us set piece after set piece and a laser focus on witty, zippy dialogue that kept the story moving, Ryo still spends hours, even days at a time, just wandering about, getting into conversations with people, and maybe occasionally being called into action for a fight or a wee chase here and there. And while Grand Theft Auto and its many imitators have given us ever larger and more sprawling worlds, Shenmue 3's development updates were full of giddy excitement over the amount of detailed teacups and drawers that were crammed into the world. More than anything, Suzuki's geeky pursuit of channeling the life of a martial artist was in full display. Our first glimpse of the fighting system was this one screenshot that made pains to highlight Ryo using real Baji-Kwan like Akira in Virtua Fighter. The truth is that Shenmue 3, played today, is a shock to the system. Whether it's a good shock or a bad shock will be up to you, but it all still comes back to that question again. What do you want from a game? I've always had this argument in my mind that criticising old games for not being up to the standard of modern games is foolish, because I don't think modern standards represent the one way everything should be done. When I see people lay into early 3D games for having primitive graphics or awkward controls or clunky design, it really annoys me. I think great games have been great forever, and bad games have always been bad. Lara Croft doesn't move as effortlessly in old Tomb Raider games as she does in the new ones, but that's because the games are about deliberate movement and traversing tricky environments. Ridge Racer doesn't handle like you're driving a real car like in Need for Speed, but that's not the point, because you can drift around the hairpin corners at 1,000,000 miles an hour and it feels incredible. Similarly, not all third-person action-adventure games play the same. In my review of Lost Planet 3 years ago, I said the game was fine, but it just felt like every other game at the time. Left stick to move, right stick to look, left trigger to aim, right trigger to shoot. I also said in my review of Final Fantasy 15 last year that it's one of the few games, apart from Shenmue, that really feels like you're wandering around as a real, full-size person and not a wee toy of a person like in most games. Part of that is down to Shenmue's deliberate sense of control, how Ryo walks by default and slowly peruses the shelves and drawers of the world around him. My point is this: no other medium demands absolute conformity, and yet any game that dares not to follow the formula laid by the big hitters gets criticised for it. Nobody wants every film at the pictures to be another cookie-cutter Marvel blockbuster. At least, no sensible person does. Taking control of Ryo at the start of Shenmue 3 is a breath of fresh air. It's something different, deliberate, unique, and, above all, I really felt like I was a part of the world he was in. Every morning I make my way down the hill toward Bailu village, stopping off at the Marshall Hall for training and sparring on the way. I'll stop by Tal's shop to earn my keep with some wood chopping, and keep my eye off the beaten path for herbs to pick, ready to be traded for money or martial arts moves. As a routine, it takes up a good chunk of Ryo's day. I've barely got to the village square and lost half the day before I can start picking up the trail towards Land D. But that's fine, because Shenmue 3 is a game about rhythm and routine. New to Shenmue 3 is a hunger system, and it's as brave and transformative here as it was in Metal Gear Solid 3 back in the day. Every waking moment drains Ryo's life bar, and if he runs, he'll find himself out of energy even faster. It means the poor boy has to eat to keep moving, which means he needs to make money to keep eating. Do you see what else that means? It means there's a reason for everything you do now. While in Shenmue 1 and 2 you could walk into every meticulously detailed restaurant just to stand around and chew the fat with Bobby while he makes his pizza. Oh, Ryo desu ka? Shenmue 3 has you actually using your hard-earned cash to buy food to keep Ryo energised and ready for action. And you better make sure you get the most bang for your buck. If you want to get some fights in at the Marshall Hall and increase your kung fu rank, you better make sure Ryo has a pocket full of black garlic to fill his belly after taking a few too many kicks to the face. At first the system seems absurd, and it's tempting to see it as the game forcing you to walk everywhere instead of run, a cynical attempt at lengthening the game's time. But what's this? Ryo's health increases as he trains, and it drains slower too as he increases his endurance. As the scope of the game increases, with more locations available to Ryo to wander around, so does his ability to speedily get to them by running for longer, if you've been keeping up to date with your training. And I'm not talking about mental hours on end doing horse stance here. Like a lot of games where stats come into play, you can ruin Shenmue 3 for yourself by trying to max everything out as fast as possible. But that's not the game's fault, is it? It's the fault of that gamer mentality. That same gamer mentality that maxes out all the armour and finds all the Korok seeds in Breath of the Wild, and then complains that all you do in Breath of the Wild is upgrade your armour and find Korok seeds. Do a little bit each day and watch Ryo's potential increase at just the right rate. Those training mini games are actually pretty good too. While the older Shenmue games had you shadow boxing in an empty car park, Shenmue 3 has a real feeling of connection between what you do and how Ryo grows. The horse stance training is as much a mental test as anything. Ryo's 1-inch punch increases in explosiveness as time goes on, and the sparring system is a lot more satisfying than the old method of levelling up Ryo's moves. Here, you enter a friendly fight with someone and input button prompts to perform your chosen moves, increasing their effectiveness and learning how to do them in real combat too. I've seen a few videos where people criticise the lack of impact in the combat, but I've noticed a few times that they're actually talking about sparring matches, where every move is automatically blocked by both Ryo and his partner. An example of folk not really knowing what they're talking about? Well, I don't know about that, but I do know that the repeating cycle of finding new martial arts moves, training them up in sparring matches, and then using them in real combat is just brilliant fun, and it wouldn't be if the combat system wasn't up to scratch. That said, I do miss the throws and counters from Shenmue 2 that sadly didn't make the cut because of the budget. Here's a wee statistic that you might find shocking. In the entire first half of Shenmue 3 that takes place in Bailu village, before Ryo leaves for Niowu, you can count the number of actual fights you get into in one hand. I'm not counting the fights you get into voluntarily at the Marshall Hall here. I'm talking about the fights you have to do as part of Ryo's epic quest to revenge. Depending on what kind of player you are, that could mean you'll have played for over 20 hours and barely got involved in any proper kung fu action. But that's the point, isn't it? Because Ryo's story is about being a martial artist, and being a martial artist is about more than just getting into fights. A lot has been made of how little plot there is in Shenmue 3. In one sense, I get that. In terms of sheer progression, Ryo is mere inches closer to getting revenge on Lan Di. In fact, it might even have gone back a few steps if anything. Yu Suzuki clearly doesn't feel like rushing his tail at all, but of course, focusing on the nuts and bolts of the plot in comparison to other games is missing the point. Suzuki said in interviews long ago that his concept for Shenmue 3's story was to focus inward rather than outward. What that means is that this is the chapter in Ryo's story where he grows as a person and as a martial artist, and it's all down to you as the player to guide that growth. Every night, Ryo can talk to Shenhua and learn more about her life, but only if you bother to get home in time before it's time for bed. These are long, incredibly detailed conversations about people and places from Ryo and Shenhua's lives, as they share their stories with each other and learn more about the world outside their own. Whether you get into these conversations or not makes no difference to the events at the end of the game, but the connection you build with Shenhua will be completely different if you skip all Ryo's interactions with her. And Suzuki isn't crass enough to give you some dating sim-like incentive for talking to Shenhua. How many games have you played where girls reward you with trinkets and other things for talking to them? Here, the reward is getting to know a character in rich detail. But clearly, that hasn't been enough for a lot of people, Shenmue fans included. It's all too easy to judge Suzuki harshly for not taking the opportunity to wrap up the big mysteries and plot beats from his epic saga in Shenmue 3, especially after the long wait and near miraculous fact that it exists at all. It would have been easy enough to do so. Shenmue 3 managed to crowdfund around $7 million, something like that. Along with other publishers and interests getting involved and exclusivity deals, I'd say a conservative estimate of around $12 million is a realistic assumption to make about how much money Suzuki's team had to play with. It's a far cry from the original Shenmue game's budget and the biggest AAA budgets of today, but it actually would have been more than enough to deliver an Uncharted-like experience. Hear me out here. I'm not talking about Uncharted in terms of pushing graphical fidelity, Hollywood spectacle and that kind of slick, big budget thrills the series is known for. I'm talking about the true form of Uncharted underneath all that gloss. The shallow, simple, completely linear and scripted experience that it offers. If that sounds unfair, then please understand, I've played and enjoyed all the Uncharted games, but I've never felt compelled to play any of them ever again because their trick only works once. Suzuki could easily have taken that template and applied it to Shenmue. He could cut the script down and give us a procession of cutscenes, linear environments and a serviceable combat system and seen the plot through to the end, even on a relatively small budget. But that wouldn't be Shenmue, would it? It'd be something else, and it wouldn't have the kind of depth that makes Shenmue the kind of series that I return to time and time again, where I tend to trade in Uncharted games the day after the credits roll. Where did the budget go then? Well, it went into crafting a world full of people that all have different things to say depending on where Ryo wants to go or what to find out. It went into a million shops with a million things you can look at and buy. It went into a huge selection of martial arts techniques to learn. It went into making a small handful of seriously impressive action sequences that a game of Shenmue 3's budget has no right to have. Chases and fight sequences that, though small in number, will stick in my memory for a lot longer than Nathan Drake almost falling off a broken ledge for the 10th time. If it sounds like I'm laying into Uncharted a lot, it's only because it's the poster boy for how every game is expected to play, even though that's a very limited way of looking at what games can and should be. Shenmue 3 is, at its heart, a story about Ryo learning how to do one martial arts technique and then learning another way to do the same martial arts technique. It's a kung fu training montage played out over days, and if you're not into martial arts movies and the culture behind them in a big way, you will feel shortchanged with the revelations on offer here. But if you're anything like me, you'll be full of wonder and awe as Ryo learns more about the world around him and gains stature as a martial artist. And when the credits roll, you'll be ready to do it all over again as you wait for Shenmue 4. Will Shenmue 4 ever appear? As the credits roll, there's a message from Yu Suzuki himself. It's a humble message that acknowledges how integral the Shenmue fanbase has been in willing Shenmue 3 to existence, and makes the promise that he aims to make Shenmue 4 a reality. Sadly, things are looking grim. In many ways, Shenmue 3 is a bit too pure for these times. It's been released into a world of YouTube shock jocks eager to outdo each other with how repulsive they can be about a game that just does things a little differently to the norm. Poor Suzuki, a genius and a legend in his own time, pottering away in something as pure and as good as Shenmue, only for it to be torn apart by loathsome pricks like this guy.
Is Shenmue 3 a parody of Shenmue?
And this guy.
I think I could piss these Shenmue fans off some more. You know, all these shintards.
They're not thoughtful or eloquent in their criticisms, they're just mean, nasty, and they add nothing of any worth to anybody else's life. But I'd like to say this, just in case a miracle happens and Yu Suzuki ends up stumbling across this silly wee YouTube channel that talks about games nobody else bothers about most of the time. Mr. Suzuki, I'd like to say a warm and sincere thank you for this game. Shenmue 3 is everything I wanted it to be, and then some. It's an evolution of the Shenmue series in small but deep and meaningful ways, and it's because Suzuki and his team pursued a clear vision that wasn't tainted by influences from anywhere else. It's special, unique, deep, rewarding, and magical. What do you want from a game? There are plenty of games right now that are laser focused on making you feel cool and making exciting things happen on screen as much as possible in an attempt to keep you engaged. But that doesn't mean they're actually engaging. Halfway through Shenmue 3, Ryo and Shenmue arrive in Yawu by ferry at night time. They get off the boat and then you take control of Ryo as he gets bombarded by market stalls and vendors and lights and colour, a far cry from the remote village he was in beforehand. There's a hotel at the end of the road that Ryo and Shenmue stay in, and when you get there's a payphone that Ryo can use to talk to characters from Shenmue 1 and 2. After checking in with them all and letting them know they arrived safe and sound, I guided Ryo up to his room, where Shenmue was standing on the balcony, looking over the bay. Ryo and Shenmue had a short conversation, and after Shenmue left for bed, I just stood there as Ryo on the balcony, overlooking Yawu and taking it all in. The whole sequence of events was so vividly, eerily reminiscent of how it actually feels to arrive in another country in the dead of night and get your bearings. And I simply wouldn't have found it anywhere near as effective if I hadn't felt like I truly lived in Ryo's shoes in every second of Shenmue 1, 2 and 3 up till that point. No other game has ever had that effect on me before, and that is why Shenmue 3 is such an incredible experience.